I would like to welcome you to this Division 1, all Division 1 conference on silviculture at landscape level. This is the first time we are, sorry, I should present myself first. I'm JP, I'm Jens Peter Skovsgaard. I'm the coordinator of Division 1 for silviculture. And the other people in Division 1 is the new person in the team is Goveen Aurora. Goveen has just started in this position as communication office holder, a new thing we have launched, or we are launching right now. And then we have Khosrow Sakatalevi from Iran, Pilson Park from Korea, and Teresa Fonseca, and it's Teresa who is behind the technical aspects of this conference here. And Pilson will be the moderator for today. But before I hand over, I have a few things just to mention. Yeah, first of all, we have this conference now, which focuses very much on silviculture at landscape level, to some extent also at stand level. And we would actually like to launch a new unit in Division 1 that should focus on silviculture at landscape level. And when we initiated this conference, or when we announced this, we were a bit unsure whether we would get enough contributions within this topic. But it turns out that a lot of people are actually working exactly at in silviculture at landscape level these days. So I think the timing is right to launch a new unit. And if you're interested, you're welcome to contact me or any of the other Division 1 office holders. And then a couple of practical announcements. We'll have 2 presentations and then 3 presentations after the break. And the break will be exactly 10 minutes. So be on time there. And after the break, we will take a photo of all participants that we have at that time. So please be back on time after the break. The mode of operations for the presenters is so that each presenter has 15 minutes, and Pilson, the moderator, will inform them after 12 minutes that they have 3 minutes left. And then we have enough time for discussion afterwards. We would like to emphasize discussion, and it's also so that you're welcome not only to present your research results, but also your research ideas or your project ideas for discussion here, if you want to do that. All right. And what else should I say? Well, please turn off your microphone if you are not the presenter, or if you don't want to say anything and or to say something. And when you have questions after the presentation, please use this raise hand function that you'll find at the bottom of your Zoom window under this icon called reactions. I think that is about it, and we can get started. So I'll hand over to Pilson.
Hello, everyone. My name is Pilson Park. I'm in Korea, so it's 6 minutes past 6 p.m. here, and good evening. But also there will be good morning and good afternoon. So I think our conferences for last 2 days went really well, and then the presentations were wonderful. And today is the last day of our conference, and I'm looking forward to listen to good presentations. Okay, so let's just start from the first presenter, and let me introduce Lars Drössle, and then he will talk about diameter distributions of oriental beech forests. Okay, Lars?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay, so I will just let you know after 12 minutes. Okay, so okay, Lars,
I will
go ahead.
Can I share my screen? And welcome everybody. I was just looking in the auditorium, and there is one Georgian Noda here who also has a talk later, and I'm also located here in Georgia, the country. Not a state, and I want to talk about diameter distributions of Fagus orientalis forests in Georgia. I am the presenter, but without my students from Göttingen and Tbilisi, I would not have been able to present you these 10 slides that I want you to show. In the next 2 minutes, I want to introduce you to the forests and show you a rough map of the potential natural vegetation in the country. But please bear in mind that the Caucasus region is a hotspot of biodiversity. It feels like a double when you compare to Central Europe, for example. So now finally I know how the Swedish foresters feel when they visit Germany. This is kind of how I feel here. I will talk today about beech forests in eastern Georgia and present 20 small study plots that we could establish because of Tobias Wolf, a German student who is defending his master thesis this year about forest development stages on exactly these forests that I will present here in eastern Georgia. Here on this picture, you see two plots of the managed beech forest where social fellings have been conducted for local firewood supply by the National Forest Agency in 2016 and 2017. So Georgia is located between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. It's protected by the Greater and Lesser Caucasus. So we are protected from the cold wind in the winter, from the north, and from the very hot air in the summer. And the precipitation, the rainfall, is from about 2,000 millimeters in the west to 500 in the east. Here on this map, you see in light green the potential natural vegetation of beech forests. In blue would be dominated by oak, but it's used for agriculture and wine grapes, for example. Dark green is dominated by fir, spruce, and also beech. And these plant species and plant communities, they are well described in English books from Georgia and also in Russian or recently translated to German by what you see in the lower right corner. Forestry is not so well developed. In Soviet time, these forests were cherished and protected, while about annually 2 million cubic meters of wood, they came from the north. Basically, regardless illegal or legal logging, a forest operation looks like this. You would tell a driver of an old Russian military truck that you need firewood, and together with a second person with a chainsaw, they would drive several hours to the forests. 98% is mountain forest, so it will take some time. They drive as close as they can come to the tree, cut it into firewood pieces, loading the truck and driving back to the village and unload the truck in front of your house. And the prices for that is comparable to firewood prices in Germany, maybe $50 per cubic meter or something. But let's focus on the study, because time is fast. We have established 20 small study plots here. Our human capacity is not so big, so representing this, you see the size of the study plots, 37.5 meters times 37.5 meters. On the right side is Lagodeci, a protected area of 60,000 hectares in size, with 10 plots on northwestern slopes in 1,000 meter elevation above sea level, which is the optimum growth for oriental beech in that location, and also typical for forest management. And on the left side, you see the other 10 plots in managed forests, 2 stands that were managed about 15 years ago, but in a few years, in a few subsequent years, and 5 years ago, same, in the same way, but you see some progress that they learn every time when you do the cutting. Interesting here from a landscape scale is that next to this large protected area, you have a high pressure by illegal cutting. So with these examples from the managed forest, I don't want to show the best cases or the worst cases. This is very typical what you can see in the country. Here you see a photo from the natural forest, or let's say old growth forest for sure, or untouched more than 150 years ago. You find all the features that we know from the Carpathian untouched beech forests with all the decay stages of deadwood and all sizes of trees. And the diameter distribution on these 10 plots looks roughly, or it looks like this. So roughly it represents this natural forest. And we have it in 2 areas that are 1 kilometer apart. So just because I also need some plots for demonstration and that we can reach them during one day, they are quite easily accessible. It only takes 2 hours with students to reach these places from the car, from the village. So if you divide these 2 areas, one is on a second northwestern slope, same elevation, typical for optimum beech forest growth, is you would have about 40 trees per hectare in the 2 smallest diameter classes. And in the other area, it would be more evenly distributed. Here you see a photo from just one plot of the managed part, and the diameter distribution. Now, I don't know if you have the same problem like me, but with this zoom bar, in the smallest diameter class, you have more trees, 110 trees with actually 8 to 10 centimeter sizes. And this can also be divided in 2. Or of course, every plot is different from the other. So in one plot, we have about 200 smallest trees, or let's say from 7 to 10 centimeters. And on another plot, we still have a lot of old trees and no regeneration coming. So I don't talk today about these small plots and what we can learn silviculturally from this. But I want to show you the main forest characteristics. On the left side, the natural forest, on the right side, the managed forest. On average, we have 200 trees per hectare in Lagodeci, in the natural forest. And we have 270 trees in the managed forest. The basal area in the natural forest is on average 33 square meters per hectare, ranging from 22 to 40 square meters. And in the managed forest, it was reduced to 19 square meters per hectare and ranges from 10 to 30 square meters. And the standing volume in the natural forest Lagodeci is on average 360 cubic meters, but exceeding 600 cubic meters on just one of these small plots. In the managed forest, Mitisiri, the average standing volume is 180 cubic meters per hectare and ranges from 70 to 380 cubic meters on these small plots. And very new data, the first national forest inventory was completed this year in September. And only this morning I got this graph from my colleague Vasil Mitreveli. It shows the diameter distribution of all Fagus orientalis trees in beech-dominated forests in Georgia. Unfortunately, it needs to be corrected as we have concentric circles in these inventory plots. So for trees that are smaller than 30 centimeter dBH, they need to be multiplied or double, basically. But this is something I need to teach my colleagues tomorrow. So we have many plans and ideas. As JP mentioned, we can do many things, but with very limited human resources. This very old forest management plan just illustrates it's more than 30 years old, and all good people, like my colleagues, they always disappear somewhere in the forest and have other work to do than writing papers, unfortunately. But what we are doing under these conditions is, as I already mentioned, the master thesis from Tobias Wolf, from Göttingen, a lot of help from German students, another bachelor student from Tarant was measuring forest canopy gaps and assessing the natural regeneration. One Georgian PhD student is now in Bavaria and studying the deadwood of these plots and other plots as well in Iran and in other countries. And we collected insects. I never wanted to collect insects, but this is what you do here if you can establish new plots. Also fungi were sampled. Beech DNA seems to be very interesting for forest geneticists. Khosrow, they are arguing where it comes from the mother of beech, from Iran, from Azerbaijan, from Georgia. So there is some potential here to do forest research, but not really silviculture. Maybe not directly.
3 minutes left.
And I think I want to thank you now for listening to me, and I especially thank to the German support, especially from the University of Göttingen. So, lots to discuss maybe with this small presentation.
Okay. Hey, thanks for the presentation. And then it's beautiful beech forest.
Yes.
Okay, so let's have the questions and then other comments. So colleagues, feel free to ask questions or comments to Lars.
JP.
Okay, JP?
I have one. I have one, and it's just out of curiosity. It's well, 40 years ago I visited these forests last time in Georgia, these fabulous forests, and unfortunately I have never been in Iran, but it's the same species, these oriental beech forests. So I wonder, I guess it's a question to both you and Khosrow, is it so that the forests in Georgia are more, you could say, eroded or exploited, or how is that? Is it exactly the same structure we see, or do we see a gradient, a geographical gradient that is either geographically determined or determined by past management practices, whatever there may have been of management? Can you say anything about that? Or is this a silly question? I don't know.
No, we have been visited with Khosrow. When was it? 2007. The beech forest in Iran. And what I see here, I cannot. It was so long time ago. For me, it's quite similar. Khosrow, what would you say? I mean, we have to.
Yes. Yes, I haven't visited Georgian beech forest, but from the slides that you showed us, looks very like similar.
Mm-hmm.
But,
it was from maybe this from Soviet time. It was different. It was cherished and protected, so there was no intervention. And how it was 150 years ago, nobody really knows. Maybe this was different. I remember a lot of grazing. We also have a big problem with grazing, but not high up in the mountains. There the forests are quite natural.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Okay, then next cultural.
Yeah, actually, I have not a question, but I enjoyed really very much your presentation. That's very nice to see those oriental beaches somewhere else than Iran. I just wanted to add a comment. There are always debates between Fagus sylvatica and Fagus orientalis. Some people say that this is overall Fagus sylvatica, subspecies or variety orientalis. And I think it comes from the very first time that Linné has called this species Fagus sylvatica. I don't know if he had visited other parts of the distribution of this genus. Maybe if I were him, I would say that it's Fagus orientalis subspecies sylvatica. And yeah, and after the glacial, I think that's these parts are stayed very untouched for glacial, and so they are much older than the beech forest in Europe. So we could also say maybe oriental beech, or actually the beech, has migrated from the eastern parts to the westerns and to the northern parts. I don't know how much these forests have been affected by glacial 5,000 or 10,000 years ago in Georgia.
They also, the area I talk about was, there was no beech forest. The place that was never covered by ice is in the very west of the country, close to Batumi, to the Turkish border. And this is very high precipitation and really the hotspot of biodiversity, but that small area was never covered by ice. And the beech has his refugial area there. Mindisiri, Kintrishi is the names, but you also have it in Greece, I think in Slovenia or in Croatia. You also have these refugial areas of beech.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's, of course, somehow at one point in time, many 10,000 years ago, it was one species, but then I don't go into this discussion. Yeah. What is different species? Maybe that's a task for Romania because they are at the front line.
Exactly. In Romania, you have the hybrid, the Fagus merziaca. Exactly. Okay, thank you.
Okay, we have only 2 minutes, so let's make it short. Okay, next, Peter.
Yes, thank you very much, Lars, for your nice presentation. And my question is, you mentioned the standing volumes of the managed and the unmanaged stands. In Germany, we have the discussion that unmanaged beech stands, for example, can store large amounts of carbon due to the high standing volumes of virgin or unmanaged forests. But I saw your experience is the average standing volume is around 300 cubic meters per hectare. Is that the experience from your region, that unmanaged forests, so on a landscape scale, cannot store that much carbon as some people expect? Is that correct?
That's correct, and that's I sign it for you if you need. This is the natural forest is in an equilibrium.
Okay.
And if you have managed and even overexploited forest here in Georgia, it's growing and it is taking carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And the best you can find nowadays is from the inventory or in the Carpathian Mountains now after 10 years, and they show it's an equilibrium at landscape scale. This you need to show your colleagues.
Thank you very much, Lars.
Okay, Sonar. Okay, last question, Sonar.
Okay, thank you for the presentation, Lars. Recently, they explored a fagus species 900 years old, they say. So what is the oldest tree in Georgia, as you know, or they explored? Oldest.
Connection was wrong. Can you repeat, please, the question?
So recently, some forestry professors find a fagus tree which is more than 900 years old. So what is the oldest tree explored in Georgia?
I don't know, but we should look in our data. We have quarter trees, not all of these 3,000 trees, but some of them to hit the center, and we can look at it. Strangely, I have the impression also when I visit Ajara, where never was an ice age covered. Somehow I have the impression these trees are more vital. When you cut them and they are 200 years old, in Germany, you would expect half of them are rotten inside, but in Ajara, but this needs to be explored on an empirical base. It's just my observation.
It's close to the Ajara border. It's close to the Ajara border in Turkey.
You can find 500 years old individuals, I have seen.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ross. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. Okay, and let's move to the next presenter, Patrick Baker. Patrick. Okay.
Just a moment.
Okay,
there we
next
go.
presenter will be Patrick Baker. Okay, welcome, Patrick.
Thanks, Pilsan. Thanks for inviting me to come and give a talk here. I'm Patrick Baker. I'm a professor of silviculture and forest ecology at the University of Melbourne here in Australia. So it is 8:30 my time in the evening. I just want to, before I start my talk, as we do here in Australia, acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we live and work. In my case, the Wurundjeri and the Bunurong, and pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. What I want to talk about today is work that we've been doing looking at how we can manage forests to be more resistant to fire in this part of the world. Right. So as many of you probably have heard, we have a lot of fire in Australia in our forests. This is a picture from the 2019-20 bushfire season, which got a lot of attention globally because of the scale of it. We had 10 million hectares of forest burned. This is in Eastern Victoria, the state in which I live, and you can see the impacts of the fire were in places quite catastrophic. In other parts of the landscape, however, they are more mixed. So you have areas where some of the forest has been, the crowns have been scorched, and other areas where you see a relatively little crown scorch and a little mortality. This is a picture from just outside of Melbourne, looking out across the landscape that was burned in the 2009 Black Saturday fires. So these were tragic fires in which nearly 200 people were killed. I think a couple of thousand houses were burnt down and about $5 billion worth of damage occurred. And what you'll notice, obviously, is there's a lot of dead trees scattered across this landscape, but you'll also notice that there's quite a lot of heterogeneity in the patterns of mortality. So you have areas in which you see complete mortality, and then areas where there was much more mixed impacts of the forest. Climate change is obviously a big issue for us here in southeastern Australia, and all of the model forecasts suggest that fire weather is going to become more extreme, and will be the extreme fire weather will be occurring more frequently. And so thinking about the forests that we have on the eastern seaboard and the southwestern corner of Australia, and how we might better manage them to be able to withstand some of this fire is an important consideration for many of us here in southeastern Australia. So the question that we were interested in is really what drives the susceptibility of trees to fire-induced mortality. And we focused on a couple of things, three things in particular. So what is it that kills a tree? Obviously, the intensity of the fire is important. If it's a particularly hot fire, then it has a higher probability of dying. The size of the tree, bigger trees are more likely to survive a fire. And then the species. So some species are more resistant to fire than other species. So we established a network of plots after the 2009 Black Saturday fires to explore some of these questions. And the challenge, of course, is it's easy enough to identify the species, and it's easy enough to measure the size of the tree and identify whether a tree is alive or dead after a fire. However, measuring fire intensity is tricky, right? You don't, it's quite rare that you actually get a direct measure of fire intensity on the ground. So we developed an analytical technique, which we've recently published. My postdoc, Raphael Trouvé, has just published in Ecological Applications, that allows us to estimate the fire intensity as a latent variable. So that is to say an unobserved variable based on the patterns of mortality within a forest. And I'm going to give sort of walk through this one species here, Eucalyptus radiata, which is the broadleaf peppermint, and just sort of explain the figure. And then I have a similar figure with more species on it. So basically what we did is we estimated the probability of mortality. So that's on the y-axis as a function of stem diameter, so dBH on the x-axis, and fire intensity, which are the 4 different lines on the graph. So we estimated fire intensity as a relative scale from 0 to 1. So 0 being no fire and 1 being the hottest fire that we observed in the landscape. And what you see here for Eucalyptus radiata is for a small tree, so 10 centimeters was the minimum size, regardless of the fire intensity, the probability of mortality is quite high. But as the trees get bigger, you can see the probability of mortality decreases quite dramatically, particularly in this is the low intensity fire. So this is 0.2 on, again, that scale of 0 to 1. This is 0.4, 0.6, 0.8. Okay, so this is a low intensity fire. Whoops. This is a low intensity fire. This is a high intensity fire. And the thing to take away from this is this gray line that runs through the middle is at 50%. Okay, so that's a 50% probability of mortality, right? So that's a coin flip, whether you live or die. And what you see in a low intensity fire for this species is that you have to be roughly about 18 or 19 centimeters in diameter to have a 50-50 chance of surviving. But at a high intensity fire, the red line, the tree needs to be about 85 centimeters in diameter. Okay, so there's a very clear an important difference in the probability of dying or surviving in a fire as a function of tree size in this species. Okay, now we did this for a number of different eucalypt species. And if you look at the species here, you go from Eucalyptus obliqua on the left, what we call stringy bark or messmate, which is the most fire tolerant species, or the most fire resistant species. And basically, if you take the red line, which is the high intensity fire, basically at about 27 or 28 centimeters, these trees have a 50% chance of surviving. So this is the most intense fire that we observed in the 2009 Black Saturday fires, which were some of the hottest fires ever seen on Earth. So basically, you can't kill Eucalyptus obliqua with fire once it gets to a certain size. As you move from left to right, however, the trees become more sensitive to fire, right? So in a high intensity fire, Eucalyptus dives, the narrowleaf peppermint, has to be about 40 centimeters to have a 50-50 chance of surviving. Eucalyptus radiata, as I said in the previous slide, has to be about 85 centimeters. Eucalyptus viminalis, which is what we call manigum, has to be about 105 centimeters to survive or have a 50-50 chance of surviving. And Eucalyptus regnans, what we call mountain ash, which is the tallest flowering plants on Earth, doesn't survive. It doesn't matter how big it is, when you have a high intensity fire, is killed. Okay, but, and this is an important but, in low intensity fires, there is a reasonable chance of them surviving once they get to a certain size. And the same with moderate intensity fires. Okay. Now, this matters because when we look at the landscapes after these fires, what we think of and have historically called catastrophic bushfires, turns out that they're not actually catastrophic in the broad sense. So there's some areas, so the light green is where everything was killed. the sort of middle green here is where there was partial canopy loss, and then the dark green is where there's full canopy cover. So in this is a 1 by 1 kilometer tile. You can see that there were some areas that were really heavily impacted by fire, right? Most of the trees were killed with the odd patches here and there. But there were other areas where you had all of the forest canopy persisted, and other areas through here and down through here where you had sort of partial mortality. And this is important because what we discovered when we looked at, we had before and after LiDAR of the 2009 bushfire, is that only about a third of the landscape actually was catastrophically impacted, where you had very broad scale mortality. So that means that large parts of the landscape actually experience low to moderate intensity fires. So how does silviculture come into this? Well, so this is Eucalyptus regnans, the mountain ash, the one that was the most fire sensitive of the species. And this is an early thinning trial. So they did effectively a spacing trial at 4 years old for this species. And what you notice is at about 25 years of age, there are some very substantial differences in the diameter of the trees, which is the y-axis here. So at 25 years old, at the sort of standard density that we manage our forests at, so this would be sort of 5 to 10,000 trees per hectare, the diameter is only about 23 centimeters. Whereas at much lower densities, the diameter is close to 60 centimeters. Okay, and this is important because what this means is that these trees here, they're 60 centimeters in diameter, so they are big enough to survive a low intensity to a moderate intensity fire, whereas these trees down here are not. So effectively, these trees here have escaped the window of risk that of sort of exposure to fire-induced mortality. So by the time they get to about 50 centimeters in diameter, they have a decent chance of surviving a fire. Whereas, and that would occur after about 20 years. Whereas at high densities, what you see is it'll take closer to 50 or 60 years. So you're effectively doubling or tripling the period of exposure of risk for these trees when you grow them in at very high densities, which is the standard way we manage these forests. Now, just to give you a little bit of a sense for how density management can help, on the left here you have an old thinning study. On the left you have a control plot. Nothing was done to it. This was established in 1939, so it's about 80 years old, 82 years old now. And on the right you have a thin stand. Okay, so obviously, as you'll notice, there's many more trees in the unthinned stand than the thin stand, and the thinned stand, the trees are larger in diameter. So this is 0 to 100 is the big red line up and down there. And I put that line there because that's a key size for critical habitat for an endangered hollow-bearing tree, a marsupial that lives in hollow-bearing trees. They need to be roughly 100 centimeters in diameter. So this is the pre-fire size distributions. And if you run a fire through this, if you simulate a fire, what you'll notice is and so this is, we're simulating a moderate intensity fire. There's very little mortality over here. There's only 4 trees that died. Whereas over here, 40%, 40 or 50% of the trees died. Okay, so you're seeing much greater mortality and a real change in the forest structure. And of course, in the context of the amount of carbon that is then put back into the system and ultimately released into the atmosphere, you're seeing much, much greater amounts of carbon being released through the fire-induced mortality here. Okay. In addition to which, you have many fewer trees to be future habitat, whereas over here, you've got a whole pile of trees that will be potential habitat trees for this critically endangered marsupial. Why is this something that we are worried about? It's something that we're worried about because the regeneration density after clear felling, which is the standard prescription for the mountain ash forests, and after wildfires is very high. Okay, so this is a survey of a number of clear fells in Victoria, and the average density here is about 5,000 stems per hectare. After the wildfire, the average density was about 10 to 12,500 trees per hectare. And so these very high density stands, just to go backwards a little bit, will be growing very slowly in diameter, which means that they're exposed to the risk of being killed by fire for a longer period. And if, as we expect with climate change, we're going to see hot fires more frequently, that means the risk of losing those trees increases quite dramatically. So the forests of the future, in terms of thinking about the management in the context of fire, is one, we're well aware of the role of fire in both as an ecological process in terms of forest renewal, but also as a real threat to southeastern Australian forests. We are well aware also that big trees are able to survive fire better, and that the more quickly we can get trees to be those, to get to those sizes where they are less susceptible to fire-induced mortality, the better able we are to get trees through these fire events, which are inevitably going to be occurring on the landscape. And then the last point that I would like to make, and sort of speaking to the theme of this workshop, is that we don't have the capacity to be thinning or managing density at the scale of millions of hectares of forest. We just don't have the infrastructure for it. We don't have the capability to do that. And so one of the things that we really need to think very critically and strategically about is, if we're going to do this, where do we do it? And so there's some important issues around, as I mentioned before, critically endangered habitat for critically endangered species, and trying to ensure that large trees persist through the fires for them is an important priority here in Victoria and other parts of southeastern Australia. So I'll stop there. Thanks to many people who are involved in supporting this, and thanks to Pilsun for inviting me to come and give a talk. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Patrick. It's really interesting. Okay, let's have questions and answers. Hey, Peter, Sonar, do you hand your hand up, or do you still have questions? Peter. Okay, I think Peter and Sonar may forget to put their hands down from the previous questions. Okay, let's move to the Negadars. Oh, sorry. Sonar, do you have question? Oh, okay. Hey, okay, let's have Negadar Dr. Negadar Sabar.
Yes,
Your
thank
turn.
you. Thank you very much, Patrick. It was really wonderful research that you present here. I have some question, because I am do something like your research in Zagros era. Please tell me, what have you any study on the soils in the forest? It's my first question. And then do you compare between natural forest and planted forest? And the third question is, what is the policy of rehabilitation of the forests, born forest really? Thank you.
Okay, so I may not remember all of the questions. The first one was about research in soil. So there's a long history of soils research here. Peter Atwill, who was a professor at the University of Melbourne for decades, wrote a book on soil nutrition. So that's something that is well known. We tend to have effectively phosphorus poor, nitrogen poor, carbon poor soils. This is a very old continent. The soils are not terribly productive. Having said that, some of the areas, in particularly the mountain ash forests, the soils that can be, the sites are very productive, right? So this is where you're seeing trees that are getting up to be 91, 92 meters tall. So clearly very productive soils in places. But there are many factors that influence that. topography in particular aspect is probably one of the most important ones. The second question was around native and planted forests. All of the work that we do is in the native forest estate. The planted forests are largely, we have a mix of Pinus radiata and Eucalyptus globulus and Eucalyptus radiata plantations. My background is actually in tropical forests, so I've spent most of my career working in Thailand. And so my interest is really in diverse natural forests. And so most of the research that we do is in these types of forests. And then the last question was about the rehabilitation of the forest after fire. At the scale at which these fires occur, rehabilitation is passive. So that is to say, we just watch it happen. There's very little that we can do at the scale that these fires occur. So for example, the 2019-20 bushfire season, 10 million hectares of forest burnt in New South Wales, or 8 million in New South Wales and 2 million here in Victoria. There's just not enough money in the government budgets to do anything about that. So most of the work that has happened after the fires is really around managing invasive animals. So shooting deer, shooting fox, shooting wild pigs in order to ensure that the native animals that survive have some resources to take advantage of. So I hope I answered each of your questions okay there.
Thank you. But please give me your email, because I think I should have more contact with you.
Sure, I'll put it into the chat. Yep. And I should just add, the approach that we took to look at the susceptibility of species to fire is a general approach that can be applied anywhere. It's very easy to do. All you need to do is collect, you put a network of plots out across the full gradient or spectrum of fire or disturbance intensity, and you measure the diameter of the tree, the species of the tree, whether it's alive or dead, and that's all you need. So we've also done this work in Western Thailand, which we published last year in the Journal of Ecology, and we were able to reconstruct the sort of fire susceptibility of about 100 different species and sort of look at some of the more complex patterns.
Thank you, Patrick.
Yep.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Patrick. And other questions? Okay, Zoner. Okay.
Okay, Patrick, thank you for the presentation. My question is about the slash and burn agriculture and relation with the forest fires. Do you think this kind of agricultural techniques increase biodiversity or the health of the forest? Slash and burn technique.
So I'm not sure what you mean by slash and burn. So in terms of silviculture, we do clear fell, burn, and sow. So you clear fell, then you burn the site, and then you use a helicopter to sow seeds across the site at very high densities. That's largely limited to a couple of tree species or a couple of forest types. And then the other, what we call the mixed species eucalypt forests, it's more of a uneven age management is sort of the more appropriate management, where you go in 3 or 4 times over 50 or 60, 70 years, and you pull out different amounts of wood. It gets complicated, however, in the mixed species forests, because we have, depending on where you are, you may have 15 different eucalypt species that co-occur in the canopy. They have different growth rates, they have different shade tolerances. And one of the problems that has occurred probably over the past 50 years is that we have historically tended to take the commercial species, which are the faster growing, slightly taller trees, more shade intolerant. And that means that we've left behind a lot of the more shade tolerant species. And those species, the peppermints, for example, that I mentioned before, Eucalyptus radiata, have very little commercial value. And so there's little interest in harvesting them or wasting the petrol in your chainsaw on them. And so they get left behind, but because they're shade tolerant, they cast a lot of shade, and it makes it very difficult for the shade intolerant species to regenerate. So we're seeing a sort of a shift to more shade tolerant and less valuable forests, and that's a real concern for sort of the long-term productivity of the forests. Very good for the one of the threatened species, a greater glider. It's a big fuzzy marsupial that is very cute. It loves those forests. So there's, as in many parts of the world, there's a tension between some of the conservation focused management and some of the production focused management.
Okay, thanks. And then Don, we have short of time, so Don will be the last person to ask question.
Yeah.
And then please make it short.
Yeah, thank you. That Patrick's, I mean, when you maybe planting rehabilitation, replanting any trees after fires, do you use drones or helicopters? Because huge areas.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So typically after fires, we have two responses. One is, so the trees have two responses. One is that they drop a lot of seeds. So in effect, it's almost like a serotiny that you see in some of the pines. So the fire cooks the seed, the gum nuts, and then that drops a lot of seeds. And so they just regenerate naturally after the fires, and often at quite high densities. The other response is that we have, most of our eucalypts are resprouting species. So they'll be killed, all of the foliage will be burned off, but within a couple of months, you'll see epicormic sprouts begin to come out of the stems. And it's remarkable for me as someone who comes from North America, it's remarkable the ability of these resprouting eucalypts to recover after these fires. It is really 2 years on. If you were to go into parts of Eastern Victoria and Southern New South Wales, you would see what appear to be forests. Clearly they've been impacted, but they're certainly recovering. The real problem that we have, however, is in some places, the seeding trees require about 20 years to become reproductively mature. And so you have a fire, the trees establish from seed, they grow. If you have another fire in less than 20 years, those trees have not set seed. And so then the seed source, there is no seed source. And in that case, the government has been very aggressive recently, particularly in 2019-20, with sowing seeds from helicopters. And we're doing this at the scale of thousands of hectares. Again, the fires were 2 million hectares. So, 15,000 hectares of seeding is a small amount. But the areas that have what we call double burns are relatively small. And so we've put a lot of effort into trying to get regeneration going on them from helicopters.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Patrick. And then
My pleasure, Pilsen.
it was really interesting story. Okay, let's just finish for the first part, half of our session, and then let's have a 10-minute break, and then we'll be back in 10 minutes. So let's restart at 7 o'clock at 5 minutes. Okay, so see you in 10 minutes. Okay. Let's have the third presenter. Okay, the third presenter is Nodar Khujadze. Noda?
Hello.
Hi. Okay, welcome, Noda.
Thank you. It's my first time here. My name is Nodar Khujadze. I'm a graduate for Ilia State University, master graduate. Graduated this year, and my presentation is about growth of pine trees in current elevation, Akhaltsikhe, Georgia. First, I want to introduce to you Georgia. In short, Georgia is a country that is founded in the Central Caucasus, between Asia and Europe. The climate is quite diverse in Georgia. On the western side, it's quite wet and moist, and on the east side, it's quite dry. Also, Georgia is covered with forests. Georgia's territory is covered by forests. Over 40% of the Georgia territory is a forest which grows now, and is mainly is from Georgian forest. 98% grows in mountain regions, and 2% grows on the plain areas. From this percentage, the 27% grows under 1,000 meters and 73 above 1,000 meters. Okay. Here I want to present the distribution of the different species of trees in Georgia. In short, this data was obtained, this table and also the map was obtained from the Georgian NFA, National Forest Agency. And it shows how much trees are distributed in our country. Okay. My main study was in region Samtskhe-Javakheti, Akhaltsikhe municipality near the Akhaltsikhe city. The soil in there is for the study region was brown forest soil, and the main species growing there were Pinus sylvestris, Skovsgaard. Okay. For the study were chosen 3 different plots on 3 different elevations: the lower, the upper, medium, and the higher elevations. Okay. Let's describe the plot itself. The plot for forest was a dense forest, and in this plot, every tree were all trees were more than 50 meters high, and because of the high density, the trees were mainly oriented on growing up than in width. The territory was inclination was 6, and it was on 1,500 meters high. Average age of this trees 70 years. On the second plot, it was quite different. Because of the low density, the trees were growing independent. They didn't have any concurrency in the growing, and so it made them grow also high and in the width. And in average, this age was 45. On all plots, there was also some trees like oak and surbus, but the amount of them was so small, and the beech itself wasn't more than 7 centimeters. Yeah. This plot was quite different from all other plots. It was the highest plot on 2,000 meters high. And compared to others, the temperature in here was quite cold. There were many pine trees which were from middle. It was a mixed forest. There were different ages of forests here. There were also several pine trees which were more than 200 years old. But because of the high elevation and more snow, because of the more snow, many trees were crown damaged. That affect its growth. Also, we could see here many dead wood and many bushes. Okay, for the method to find the growth of the pine trees, all trees. Sorry. All trees with more than 8 centimeters with DBH were recorded. They mainly used equipment on the field, and all data was recorded, and the main equipment used for this was increment borer, vertex forests, GPSs, and the measurement tape for DBH. Every data was then recorded and collected on the data sheet. Yes. For the measurement, every plot was 12 meters in radius. After collecting the borkers from all sample trees, these borkers were then analyzed, and last 5 years, from last 5 years, were calculated. Its DBH growth yearly and its increment size. With this was calculated the amount of for the study I had only 1 year, and that's why I used workers to calculate last 5 years with knowing the increment size and multiplying it by 2 for the 2. I calculated how much it grows in here, but this is quite a rough measurement. It is shown that every plot was growing from 1 to 4 and 2 centimeters in a year. Okay, after this was found the stand volume and steam volume without arc included. For this was used the method of volume, basal area, and form factor calculation. After finding the steam and stand volume, this was then scaled up for the 1 hectare of this area by using the slope correction formula to find the amount of trees in the total area, and also to find how much volume was on the entire whole hectare of forest, and how much yearly growth was. Also was found the wood density. This was mainly because in my study I also calculated the carbon content of the trees, and the wood density was mainly calculated found by the water displacement method, and the mass of the workers were found by measuring its weight. After finding the density of the workers, I concluded it as a density of the tree itself. And from that, then I calculated the mass by knowing the density and the volume. The total tree mass was calculated. After finding the total mass of the wood itself, I used the literature in which it was written that the half of the dry wood mass is carbon. And from this, I found it after this, I found the yearly sequestration of the carbon in the woods, in the forest itself. In conclusion, I must say that this was a method. I had only 1 year for my thesis work, and I must say that it isn't a representative study, but the main goal was to find a methodology for finding tree volume, mass, and in some way carbon content in a year, the growth in a year. Thank you for your attention, and any questions? Yes, Peter.
Okay, JP.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead.
So this is very basic and interesting studies. I like this type of you could say simple approach, but very important in a larger perspective. Did you compare your results or your estimates with the pine from other parts of the world, or did you only focus on the local situation?
Tried to do, but there weren't quite a lot of data about those. Mainly, I tried to compare them with the same elevation of mine. It showed that in the mass and I mean the volume and the carbon concentration, it was quite similar.
All right, thank you.
Okay, do we have other questions?
This is mainly methodology, and for this is quite first for me. I'm trying to, in the future, I might want to increase my study more. I know that the study itself was quite small. Single plot on every elevation was quite a small study, and I want to scale up the study in the future. So I'm thinking for this as a PhD work in the future. Thank you for your listening.
Okay, thank you, Nodar. We all know that it's very difficult to work in areas over 2,000 meters, and you have to climb up. So good luck, and then.
Thank you. Yeah,
Okay,
in the future we
thank
are also thinking to plant the devices which will measure temperature and other aspects of the place, and I hope it will be a better study. But for now, it's mainly a methodology for a little period of study. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so thank you, Nodar. Thank you for presentation. Okay, let's move to Southeast Asia. So now next presenter will be Marilyn Combalicer, and she is working in Philippines. So we are moving from Georgia to Philippines. Okay, Marilyn.
Okay, yes, my presentation is about regeneration in acacia plantations of Mount Makiling Forest Reserve, Philippines. And with my co-authors, I'll be presenting this, Jonathan Hernandez, Jessa Ata, Prof. Wilson Park, and Prof. Don Quinn. So let me give you first an introduction. The forest degradation in the Philippines, these are associated with the natural and anthropogenic causes, and this has been immense that led to a significant decline in native plant biodiversity. And so forest restoration was recognized as a strategy to rehabilitate degraded areas. And we had several attempts to restore our Philippine forests. The reconstruction of native plant community is considered as the first approach of a restoration effort. This is to effectively restore the ecological integrity of the area into its original state. And these efforts includes the establishment of perennial species and the introduction of nurse species. This is to stabilize soil and to provide habitat for other organisms, and also to ameliorate the impacts of disturbance. And in the Philippines, Acacia, Mangium, and Auriculiformis, these have been used for a long time to rehabilitate degraded forests because of their ability to thrive in harsh conditions and to compete with the Imperata cylindrica in the Philippines. And for the objective, we investigated the ability of acacia plantations, the Acacia auriculiformis and Mangium, to reconstruct a native plant community towards forest restoration. And this is our study site in Mount Makiling Forest Reserve with the following information: coordinates the area, the elevation, rainfall, and temperature. But in this area, we have our main study site, which is showing the grassland area dominated previously by Saccharum spontaneum and Imperata cylindrica in 1991, and the same grassland area in 2003 planted with Acacia auriculiformis and Mangium. So this is in the city of Iglesia, in the southwestern slope of Mount Makiling with 500 meters above sea level. And the area has been previously cultivated and perennially burned prior to the 1990s. And the last time it was burned extensively was in 1991. And to restore this fire-degraded area, the area was planted by Acacia Mangium and Auriculiformis in 1993, accompanied by intensive forest fire protection. So what we did in the area, for the vegetation survey, we established plots. We measuring 20 by 20 meter in each age class. And then we measure the trees and identify the species present in there. And the correct identification, we adapted that to the plant list database and cost digital flora of the Philippines. And then also we measure the 1 by 1 meter plot to measure some seedlings and also for the soil samples. And also we have this horizontal and vertical stand structure in this in the case of the Acacia auriculaformis. And A and B shows the period 1993 to 2008, and C and D for the period 2009 and 2019. So the canopy image analysis we were done in the area through HemiView canopy image analysis software at the center of each plot. And then we use the different parameters to obtain the characteristics of the area, including this shown in the table, and also the diversity indices, the basal area, the stand density. And the importance value was determined to describe the ecological significance of the woody regenerants in the understory of the plantations. Also in the area, we measured the mortality rate, and also we obtained data on the regeneration and of course the microclimate. This is the area, actual area we visited in 2019 in Acacia auriculaformis and 2018 in Acacia mangium. And as you can see in the figure, you notice the leaning trees, naturally decaying trees in the area. So this is for the stand characteristics of Acacia auriculaformis plantation, and the results indicates a remarkable change in the species composition and stand structure of the plantation between these study periods. And this can be attributed to the observed significant changes in stem density for mature trees and seedlings or saplings. And the species diversity increased from low to moderate. For the stand characteristics of Acacia mangium, along with the stem density, the changes in basal area of all three species emphasize compositional change of the forest, and the change in the basal area and density of the common species also brought change in their importance value. So in this case, you've seen the increase in the species diversity and also in the richness of the area. In this slide, it shows the evidence of dead individuals of Acacia auriculaformis, which was recorded from the site, which created a canopy gap. So, which means the pH of Acacia auriculaformis is increased with age. And the number of remaining trees in the 26-year study period decreased to 83% due to mortality. So the forest canopy gap created by this mortality, we also have the facilitated the germination of other species in the area, which provides the microclimate condition of the area. And then we have the changes in the percent annual mortality rate of the stem. We've seen in here that for 1993 to 2009 and 2010 to 2018, there's a decrease in the annual mortality rate of the area, but still large. And then also in terms of the importance value, the Acacia auriculaformis in the 2019 period, the plantation was already dominated by shrub to small trees, including the Antidesma bonus, the Bridelia insulana, Pterocarpus indicus, and other species, in which these species are mostly common in Mount Makiling Forest Reserve. And also we noticed the presence of other growth forms, the palms, pines, subshrubs, and rhizomes. For the Acacia mangium plantation, we have in here, you notice that still the dominant species is the Acacia mangium, but there's a decline on it in the 2010-2018 period. And then it is followed by Ficus septica and Pterocarpus indicus. But we never know in the future if this trend in Acacia mangium will still dominate or it will be dominated by other species in the area. Then, so in here, it shows the number of exotic species that decrease, while the number of native species increase in the area. So it increased from 55% to 65% from 2019 period to 2008 to 2019 study period. And we observed the understory in the Acacia auriculiformis, and we observed native or saplings in the area, including, as you can see in this figure, the Macaranga tanarius, Thysoxylum gaudicaudinanum, the Diplodiscus paniculatus, and others. And this suggests that the presence of Acacia auriculiformis may have played a significant role in the improving the soil fertility in the plantation area over time, thereby creating more suitable microclimate conditions to support plant and microbial life. And since after the plantation of Acacia auriculiformis, some pioneer species emerged in the area. And then this is the dominant fruit type of woody regeneration in the area, with a relative density higher in the drupeberry type and berry type of fruit. For the Acacia auriculiformis dominant regenerans, or the regeneration in the area, most of the fruits, they are categorized as from A to C as winged fruit. And then from D to F, we have the dehiscent fruits. And then from G to I, we have the fleshy fruits. So these are most of the species or type of the species we observe in the area and are distributed in the area. And for the list of newly recruited indigenous species in the Acacia mangium, we have the following. 12 out of 13 species listed in here are considered native in the Philippines. And we have in here on the list, of course, we have Diplodiscus paniculatus as endemic, and then we have the Gongrospermum philippinense, and then the Strombotia philippinensis. So these are evidence of active regeneration on the ground level, which was also observed in the entire plot through the presence of seedlings of various tree species. And as I mentioned, most of these species are native to the Philippines, and there are a lot other more species, including the presence of Celtis luzonica, which is abundant in Mount Makiling Forest Reserve. And so for the conclusion, this study has shown that Acacia auriculiformis and Acacia mangium plantations have the potential to stimulate the reconstruction of a native woody plant community in Mount Makiling Forest Reserve. So as exotic species, which are normally assumed to be detrimental to the native biodiversity, Acacia mangium and Acacia auriculiformis demonstrated to be a safe nurse or facilitator species for vegetation reconstruction in the case of Mount Makiling Forest Reserve. And so overall, the plantations have partially restored at least some of the important attributes of the ecosystem. We have the species composition, the structural diversity, the physical conditions and ecosystem functionality. So the presence of desirable plants, the of course native species already has been partially achieved, but total eradication of undesirable plants that are potentially invasive should be considered. And so further studies and monitoring on other key ecosystem attributes and the impacts to native plant community in the plantations are important to increase the similarity in the reference ecosystem. So that's the end of my presentation, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Marilyn. It's very interesting story that plantations can play an important role as a facilitator in the heavily damaged area. Thank you. And do you have questions? Okay, first Joner and then second Don. Okay, Joner, you first.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Marilyn, for the presentation. It was interesting because, as I understand, you want to reconstruct the native vegetation, but first you want to increase the health of the soil by using exotic woody plants, Acacias.
Yes.
So I'm curious about the future of this study because, as I know, Acacias are all over the world exotic and introduced in many countries, in Turkey, also in Georgia, maybe, and they are increasing. As I realized in Turkey, for example, after 1950s, Acacia, they plant Acacia very much in kind of tropical forest, and now with the destruction of the forest, they are becoming invasive, and it decreases the quality of the forest when they become more, when they go like spread more. Even the culturally important woody plants are decreasing, becoming unhealthy, and the quality of the honey decreases. Like it has a cascading effect. It can have. So, did you make any kind of this kind of modeling about the dangerous stuff, let's say, for the communities and the countries? Modeling for.
We haven't done that kind of modeling about Acacia mangium and Acacia auriculiformis in the Philippines. We have these plantations in various parts of the country, but mostly they are planted for fuel wood plantations. But my presentation just focused merely on the effect of Acacia mangium plantation in the case only of Mount Makiling Forest Reserve. So I don't know what really the effect of Acacia mangium in other parts of the country or in other parts of the world, but in the case of Mount Makiling, this has been a very good nurse species or facilitator species, and little by little we were able to observe the existence of native species which we can find in the nearby forest or in the nearby primary forest in the Philippines. But hopefully we can do that. Thank you very much, Asana.
Okay, thanks. And then next, Don.
Thank you, Marilyn. including my name also, because I know that we're working and we've been working together actually 2010, but I didn't go to after 2010, so 10 years ago. It is excellent because I mean that Acacia is nurse trees, right?
Yes.
Improving soils, everything, but changing back to native species, right? But I'm so happy you didn't plant any eucalyptus, because eucalyptus and also good news because Dipterocarpus coming back to their area, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So we have to watch out another 10 years or 20 years, and then and Makiling Mountain is a very excellent places, and with the Pilsen Park, and we all together interested in that. I hope Apoko, if you propose a project to Apoko, I mean, I will ask support continuous research, and I'm so happy and the result coming back to Dipterocarpus native species. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, thank you very much, Professor Lee. Actually, this was a product of the ASEAN Korea Environmental Cooperation Project, and it's my initiative and my colleagues' initiative to continue the study in the area, even though we are not we don't have a project now yet in the Philippines. So because we have a lot of data in the area, so we really wanted to continue this. Yes, right. Maybe after 10 years again or 5 years, we can have good data.
Thanks, Marilyn. Let's cross fingers so Marilyn can have research funding in the future. Okay. And yeah, I'd like to add one more comment for Sonar's question. Like in Korea, we had also very denuded land about 50 years ago after the war. So we chose Pinus rigida, and then other like pseudo Acacia. But luckily they were very shade intolerant, and also we had more native species better fit to our land later when the soil was recovered. So with the soil became better, and then our native species came back. So the selection of nurse trees, right trees, is really important. So they don't hinder the native species coming back after the soil became more fertilized, more nutritious. So I think plantation can be work as a facilitator when the area is very denuded or very degraded, but we have to be really careful for selection of the nurse trees. Okay, Marilyn, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, I will finish this session and then hand over to this conference to JP. Thank you very much for presenters for the wonderful presentation. It was extremely interesting. And then now, thank you, Teresa, for organizing this, all the technical support. And then thank you, Garvin, for taking notes. And then now it's JP, it's your turn.
Thank you. And I can only add to all the thanks here. Also, I would like to thank the participants. If you're not participating in a conference, there is no conference. If we don't have any presenters, there is no conference. And if we don't have a good moderator, there is no conference also. So thank you, all of you who contributed to this. We've had a truly international conference. Unfortunately, we have not had any presentations from South America, and we haven't had any from Africa. And we hope to improve that in the future, of course. But we have already now gained a little more experience with this, and I think this is actually a very valuable way of meeting, since we cannot meet physically. And even when we can meet physically again, it could still be a valuable addition, because we can have such, you could call them short conferences or discussion fora that where you spend maybe just 2 or 3 hours per day for a short period, and then this is a fast and easy way to exchange views and get inspiration from other parts of the world. So again, thank you very much for contributing. If you have comments or suggestions for improvements of this format or suggestions for the future, you're welcome to contact me or anyone else of the Division 1 coordinate ship. So thank you very much for participating. Have a nice day, have a nice night, wherever you are in your schedule.
Thank you very much. It was wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.